Hello, and welcome to the presentation on argument and persuasion. If you don't know what argument is or persuasion is, which you probably do at this point in your life, they're sort of seen as sisters. So argument is more of the supported argument using logic and things like expert opinions and support such as that. And there's a tiny difference between argument and persuasion in that persuasion also has those things, but it relies a little more heavily on emotion. If you think about things that you see out there in the world, advertisements, editorials, speeches, propaganda, reviews, blogs, and so on, you're going to notice a few key elements about those. Now, first of all, advertisements are definitely trying to convince you of something. In this particular one, you can see a lady who's holding probably a 5 or so pound weight, and she's dressed in Nike, and she's obviously fit. Now, advertisements are geared toward certain things. This one is probably geared toward women, and it makes a statement. If you think about what statement it makes, you're seeing, okay, she's wearing Nike, she's got on the gloves, she's got on the shirt, she's probably got on the shoes. There's a little icon in the top right-hand corner, and that basically is telling us how strong she is, and that if you wear Nike, you too can be strong. Now, this next one might look familiar. You might go to the doctor's office and see a lot of things inside magazines. One of those is editorials. Editorials can also be in newspapers, television, radio, and the internet, but I like the magazine example because you see those kind of laying around different places when you go, and even the covers of those have a purpose. So if you really think about it, when you're looking at gardening, for instance, the tree guides, you see the little tree guide thing on this one, buying big and stress alert. Well, it just so happens that I've read that one, and inside of the buying big is really an advertisement for different places to purchase these types of trees. So, each one, even if you look in any magazine, think of Food Ideas, the one on the left there, you're going to see that they have lots of advertisements that are related to their own magazine. Hopefully this picture looks familiar to you. It's Martin Luther King Jr. I chose this one because his speeches were persuasive because of many things, but also because he had a message of unity rather than division. And so his type of persuasion really was like, was just great because he tried to convey a message of all of us working together for a better world. And sort of pulled people in that way. Now, the thing is that if you are on the side of someone, then you're already there, right? So if they believe something and they're trying to get you to come over to their side, and you're already there, there's no work that needs to be done. If you're on the fence in the middle, there is a chance that someone can convince you that you need to come over to their side. But think about two people having an argument about a subject where they're completely polarized, where they don't agree at all on anything. You're going to see that those people, it's very hard for one to influence the other in a way that persuades them to turn over in their direction to believe what they believe. Now, these are interesting, and I chose propaganda because it's really relevant in our lives. We see it all the time. If you take a look at pictures in here, just take a minute and think about the difference in these. And regardless of your political preferences or what you know about these two fellas, the signs are what we're looking at. So if you look at the one on the left, this is President Trump, and it says "Take Back Our Country." And you can see the colors, red and white, on the right. In the picture, and you can see the little bitty star on the left. Well, if you think about the representation of Democrat and Republican, it sort of has that division, right? So you could interpret it that way. There are other ways to interpret it as well, but that's one way that you can interpret it, is that this is sort of making a statement about the greatness of the Republican Party and maybe not so much on the Democrat side. Now, there are other ways, of course, that you can interpret it, but that's just one way. And color usage is very important when you're doing these propaganda pieces as well. Now, notice he's standing by himself. He doesn't have someone behind him. That could be meant to portray strength, ability to lead, and things such as that. Now, if you look on the right at Obama's, you can see in the background the signs that people are hanging up. And if you really looked closely at the original of this, you would see diversity in the people behind him. Now, he is in front, and that also makes a statement, right? So he's the leader, but then you look behind him and you think, oh, people are behind him. The change we can believe in, right? And Trump has used take back our country, sort of including people. Now, the colors in the Obama propaganda also are important. Blue typically represents Democrats. So just take a look at these things out there in the world as you're going around and exploring argument. Now, this is here because whether or not you believe so, the reviews that you see on TV, in magazines and newspapers, those are a form of persuasive writing. For why else, would you have a book review other than try to talk people into reading something that you believe to have value, or to deter them from reading something? Blogs are important. This is my old blog. It's in the current phase, is being revamped, but it's still there. So blogs are commentaries on particular topics, usually. Now, sometimes blogs can be on a variety of topics depending on who's doing it, and mine is on a variety of topics. But you really have to be careful. I want to comment on this just a minute when you're trying to use these as sources, because frequently they're not written really for the purpose of being used for a source. A lot of times they don't have references in them, and they're really opinion pieces. So please be mindful of that as you're out here looking for sources as well. Now, this is one of my students upset about their paper. No, totally kidding. This is just talking about the argumentative essay, that it should use logic and reason. Some emotion is allowed. And expert opinions and things such as that to support your point of view. So here are a couple components. If you think about the way that you learned about writing an essay, there were 5 paragraphs, right? So you learned that there was an introduction, there were 3 paragraphs, one had each point in it, and then you had a conclusion. Of course, in college that changes. You could have 5 paragraphs for one topic, but the point is that it does have a rhythm to it. So at the beginning here, you've got your lead or hook that captures your attention. You want to capture the reader's attention so that they'll read what you have to say. The thesis statement really is the writer's assertion or belief. Now, it's very creatively worded by the time you get to your final thesis statement, but that's essentially what it is. Supporting arguments are very important, and if you haven't heard of logos, pathos, and ethos, you're getting ready to hear about those briefly. Optional counter arguments respond to the reader's concerns and objections. So that is, if you acknowledge the other side, they're more likely to listen to you. So if you say, well, I understand what you're saying, but, and then the but is your argument, your argument that you're supporting. Then there's the conclusion, which obviously restates the thesis, but in your case, in your paper, you're actually going to have a solution that you sort of propose to work on the problem that you've discussed in your paper. So here it is. There are many, many, many ways to do a lead in or hook. The first one's fun fact. I kind of like this one. I thought it was interesting. Archaeologists believe, based on marks they've seen on mummies, that human beings had tattoos between 4000 and 2000 BC in Egypt. I just thought that was a pretty cool fun fact. So if you're writing something on, problems with tattoos, that you're a tattoo artist, then that would be a cute little fun fact to include. Here's another one, a thesis from a source. People don't really think about that, but if you find an article that you really like, you can quote their thesis statement, which is an overview of their entire piece. So that's a good thing to do. And it says few aspects of the American mythos form, such as a complex set of relationships with the African American experience as the idea of the frontier. So if you haven't read Pamela Swanigan, it's some pretty cool reading. And it goes on, your favorite quote, famous people quote, a story. So there's several different ways that you can use, there's several different things that you can use for your lead-in or hook. Now this is something I want to expose you to, because in the end your thesis statement is going to have several components. The only type of thesis statement that should ever say "I believe" is really your working thesis, which is a rough draft. It's how you're getting started on it. So what you're seeing here is you're seeing that "I believe" statement, and then you would insert a position on some aspect that you are debating on. So if there's a problem inside of the medical field in the realm of technology, you would talk about that there. And then because of here in your rough draft has those supports. So it'd have your point 1, point 2, and point 3 that fall under the umbrella of your first category. So here's one example. Go ahead and pause this video right now and read this so that you have an understanding of the hook, the transition and lead-in, and the thesis. This is actually a historical excerpt on the Cherokee Nation and the Trail of Tears, so it's pretty interesting. So go ahead and pause and read that. So if you read this, you can see that it's got a pretty good hook there. Although friction between Native Americans and settlers existed from the moment of the first Europeans arrived in North America, the Trail of Tears incident of 1830 marked the lowest point in America's relationship with its native population. So it's got like a little interesting tidbit of information. Now the next stuff is sort of that history piece that you need to know to understand the actual thesis. So, and in this case, the authorities, the thesis statement, the authorities who forced Native Americans to flee their homes were responsible for, and here's where you've got a good thesis statement with 3 points. Now in your final one, you will actually have a counterpoint at the beginning, but this is a great example of the 3-point kind. The authorities who forced Native Americans to flee their homes were responsible for stripping Native Americans of their land, depriving them of their freedom, and forcing them to adapt and create a new culture. So when you look up to this last slide and look at argument 1, 2, and 3, you can clearly see that outlined inside of the piece on the Trail of Tears. Now this is just a reminder of the structure of any essay really, but because you would have point 2, point 3, point 1, you have all your points lined out here. But in a persuasive essay, they're arguments. They're parts of your overall position. So just like the blanks that we saw. Now the difference in this says introduction and thesis, then you've got argument 1, and see there support, support, support. So you're supporting each point. Now this may take on the appearance of having 3 paragraphs for argument 1 or point 1 with several different supports in each paragraph. It just depends on how long your essay is. So you've got that beginning piece, the 3 points, and then conclusion and commentary. That one is where you do restate your position. You do it eloquently at this level, and then you go ahead and put in your solution in this class. So you will actually have a solution that you propose to address the original problem. So what you see here is some thesis statements that students have done, and it seems kind of odd that they're talking about food waste in this context, but you'll see a very good thesis statement on the next screen that will make all clear. So the very first thing that some of the students did in class is, I believe we must stop wasting food. Well, now that is a great idea, but it also is just a statement. It is not a thesis statement. The next one, the problem of food waste can easily be solved by implementing 3 simple steps: reduce, reuse, and recycle. So as you're doing well, we'll talk about the final thesis statement on the next page, but as you're doing this, really look to see if they have the points, if they have some sort of position. And this one has all the elements that you saw at the beginning with the position, that it can be solved, and here are the steps to take, and there's 3 clear steps. If you aren't reducing, reusing, and recycling, you should. That's just a should statement, as though you're pointing your finger at someone. And the next one, really, you can pause the video to read it, but it's really more of like a rant, where the student is just going on and on about this topic and not really organizing anything, and there's no semblance of a thesis statement in this. The last one, so you can see that these explain the prior statements. While food waste is inevitable to some degree, the problem could be lessened by reducing production where it is not needed, eating leftovers or donating them to those in need, and recycling food waste for compost. So you can see how the class sort of evolved into this thesis statement that has a counter argument, a position, and the 3 points. And if you look at the thesis generator that I provided online, you're going to see that it's number 4 that produces this result, and that's the end result that you'll have for your particular paper. Now this section is just a review, hopefully, for all of the students. It talks about the types of support in those papers. The first one's logical, or logos, and that one really is truly about the logic, but it's not just about the facts in the statistics. It's also about, does the actual paper, does the actual information make sense in terms of organization and how it's put together. The second one you see here, ethical appeal or ethos. These really question whether or not the points are credible in the paper. Are they presented with integrity? Are they true as far as the person knew who was writing it? And also, are they the right thing to do? Now, sometimes you'll see ethical or ethos appeal represented with someone who is in power, someone that someone trusts, asking you to do the right thing. But don't confuse that with just ethical appeal as someone in a position of power or someone that you trust telling you to do it. Because really, it's truly about your definition of the right thing to do. Emotional appeal and pathos. This one is question about how you feel when you see something. So if you think back to the commercials about the animal shelter or animal rescue, where they're playing the beautiful music in the background and you're seeing some pictures of animals that are injured, and then they're asking you to make a donation. So you're feeling sorry for the animal so that you'll make a donation. And this is frequently used in commercials. So if you look at this one, this is an example of that logical or logos appeal. It's usually got the expert testimony in it. In this picture, we assume that she is a doctor of some sort telling us that it's important rather than an actor. Now on commercials, they actually have to tell you if this is a paid actor on there, so you can kind of see whether or not they are, but this is just a screenshot of something from a magazine or an article. This one definitely contains, if you saw the TV commercial, the statistical information. It's like 4 out of 5 people experience improvements after using this product. So that's one of those logical pieces you'll see. And then it also suggests that the product is a logical choice at the end. Now, make sure that when you're picking out statistics and information to support this logical piece, that you're looking for adequate, accurate, and representative information. Make sure it's not just some statement that doesn't have any substance. So you want to make sure that it's researched information. Make sure it's accurate. To do that, you can always look it up somewhere else to make sure that someone else is also saying that. And representative means that it represents the exact thing that you're talking about. So if you're talking about food waste, you wouldn't want to pull information out from another source and make it appear that it's about that. Here's a picture of Uncle Sam asking people to join the army. And he's basically saying, come do the right thing and join us. And then, of course, Captain America over here saving the world and wanting people to follow him into battle. The emotional appeal pulls on our emotions, like in commercials. Now, this type of appeal involves using strong words with strong emotional overtones. So it can move the reader to accept the point of view. So if you have two people who completely disagree with something, you're probably not going to be able to emotionally appeal to the other person to bring them over to your side. But anyone who's already on your side, you already have them, and then anybody who's on the fence might be able to be swayed by this technique. Now is a good time to pause your video and watch the videos in here. The links are actually also provided down below in case the links on the video don't work. But watch each one and look for logos, pathos, and ethos. I think you're going to find those very interesting. And if you notice, some of the commercials don't even have the product in them. It just shows what it is at the very end. Now, of course, hopefully you understand that not all emotional arguments are sad ones. Here you see the Six Flags guy encouraging us to go have a good time at Six Flags. And then you see an actress drinking milk and looking beautiful in her red dress. So if we all drink milk, we're going to be strong and look like that. Okay, so these are actual thesis statements that students came up with in class. And we're talking about a position that's taken, and then we're going to talk about counter arguments very briefly in this quick review. So on the left you see oil companies should not be allowed to drill for oil in Alaska, and on the right you see overweight people should be charged more for airplane tickets. So on this, students did make this up, and we want to look at plugging in the parts for an actual thesis statement if you were going to write about one of these. So if we chose overweight people should be charged more for airplane tickets, which has actually been a controversy before, we have to come up with the counter argument, the position, points 1, 2, and 3. So pause this video and see if you can think of those before we move forth. Okay, so if you pause the video, hopefully you were able to come up with a few thoughts, and we're going to go over one that the students did in class. So here you see the second bullet point. Although airlines may lose money forcing overweight people to purchase 2 tickets, this is actually the combined method to put the counter argument with the position. So if you look at the parentheses, they tell you which one's which. And then for point 1, the practice may reduce safety risks. Point 2 may provide a more comfortable environment, and point 3 could be, you could just fill in the blank. So you can see how easy it is to construct these, and you also can probably see by now how you can make this easily turn into an outline for your paper. So here are a few examples. The first one, the idea that they started with is just that they wanted to become an automotive engineer. And this statement contains all of those components that we've just been talking about. The first one says, although both automotive engineers and mechanics can work on cars, which they both can, automotive engineers differ from mechanics in education, professional opportunities, and creative opportunities. So you can see this person is arguing for a very specific one. The next one I'll let you read independently. Now this is a good example of one of those topics that we might use in a classroom to debate something, and it is a good example of a thesis statement, but as you know already, you're not allowed to use anything that's on procon.org, the website, and this is one of those topics. So while the death penalty may have some deterrent value, it infringes upon the rights of the sentenced individuals. It is in opposition to good moral judgment and is murder by definition. Now when they came up with this class, one of the things I pointed out was that good moral judgment, where do we define that from? So we usually do that from our own personal perspective, and it might not be the best point, but it could be used if you did it and defined what that meant. So just keep that in mind when you're going through examples, especially online, that some things have to be defined a special way if you're going to use them. And if it doesn't work out for you when you get started, you need to change your method. So here are a few good rules of thumb for sources, because you're really going into the last paper pretty hard. Here's some rules that you'll have to abide by in all of those. So please take notes and keep this in your back pocket, so to speak, so that you have that information. The first thing is it has to have a date. Has to. Now, people get confused when the date's not right under the author's name when they go to a web page, and it's not always there. It could be down at the bottom under edited, or it could say updated last. It can also be in your internet address. So up there at the top where you see the HTTP www, some newspapers put those dates up there. So please look around and don't just stop short once you see that there's no date under the author. So it also must have an author. Now, the only exception to this is when it's by a government agency, which is still an author. So you can't go and do a username like, Mandy Loves Flowers, unless that's her first name and last name, Mandy Loves Flowers. But you can't use the username for that, like on a blog. So you might see those on blogs, you might see them on YouTube videos. And usually if you are looking at a YouTube video from TEDx, a lot of times they'll put the actual person who did that in there. So just keep that in mind as well. Sometimes you have to look around for those things also. You also have to ask if it's recent. Now, when I say recent, it means within the 5 to 7 year range. The only exception to that is if you are having to provide historical information about a topic to help the reader understand, that would be your exception. But otherwise, it needs to fall within that 5 to 7, no more than 5 to 7 years, and preferably 5. So it must have a title. It's rare to find one that doesn't have a title, but it does happen. So make sure that it has a title. Appears to be credible. Now remember, credibility of an author or agency is established in a special way. We had that in your critique paper, so you can look back at some of those questions that were asked to help you. But you're wanting to make sure that that author has the expertise to write about that topic. And also, don't forget about validity. You want to make sure that the information in that article, especially when you're just going online and doing research, that it's true. Think fact check. So you want to fact check a few pieces in there to make sure that they're true. And if you do, you also need to include where you fact checked it at on your references page. So please always keep that in mind as well. And as a last comment, don't forget that this is, when you're writing something, it's always an interaction between the writer and the reader. It needs to be engaging and organized so that they can understand it. I hope that you found this video helpful. Please feel free to contact me if you have any questions, and have a wonderful day.